The little girl's brother was adopted without her, but then 18 years later she got a strange message. Though they didn't live together, Shawnee and Luke were as close as siblings could be. The young pair resided in different foster homes, but they still saw each other all the time. Until, that is, they were each adopted out to different families. For almost 2 decades, they would have no idea where the other one was, but that all changed one day, thanks to a fateful message on Facebook. Shawnee and Luke's troubles started while they were both very young. A woman had taken the decision to adopt and raise Luke as her own, but she just couldn't commit to taking on his sister as well. Because of that, 3-year-old Shawnee would ultimately end up with a different adoptive family to her brother. That meant the young siblings would now be separated by thousands of miles. The kids had spent their earliest days as the best of friends, but now they would never have the opportunity to see each other again. They'd both found new families, but at the expense of a relationship with each other. It's unquestionably sad that these kids had been robbed of the chance to grow up together, but it wasn't all bad. They had, after all, both entered into good homes and were being brought up well. That's the good news, but neither of the kids ever forgot about the sibling from whom they'd been torn. The years passed, and Shawnee and Luke grew up and lived their respective lives. They never saw each other, nor even heard any news about their sibling. But as an adult, Luke was determined to track his sister down. He'd never forgotten her, so he got on social media and did some amateur detective work. Luke didn't have much information to go on. He hadn't seen his sister in so many years by this point, and he only really knew her first name and how old she was. But with a bit of persistence, he managed to find someone on Facebook who seemed to fit the bill. Now, all Luke had to do was to fire off a message to this woman to see if she was his sister. That must have been a strange, stressful greeting to compose, but it needed to be done. The question was, how would it play out from there? Was he barking up the wrong tree, or was he about to re-establish contact with the sister he'd lost so long ago? It had been 18 long years since Luke had seen Shawnee, but he'd never lost sight of the bond they'd once shared. As anyone with a sibling will know, it's a connection that stays with you for the rest of your life. Even in circumstances as tough as the one this pair found themselves in, there's no forgetting about your brother or sister. Still, for the first few years of their separation, there wasn't much either kid could do. They were both so young, so they couldn't exactly conduct a search for their lost sibling. But even when they got a little older, they were still living in a world before social media was ubiquitous. Finding people wasn't quite so simple in those days. And as they got older, of course, life started getting in the way. Luke, for one, had grown up to start a family of his own, so conducting investigations wasn't really an option for a long time. He had other priorities upon which he needed to focus. Besides, the chances of Luke actually managing to track down Shawnee after all these years seemed slim, at best. Having initially lived in New Mexico alongside his sister, Luke had since moved to Baltimore. And who knew where his sibling had ended up in the intervening years? She could have been anywhere. Still, even with all odds stacked against him and with his own family to worry about, Luke eventually found the time to start looking. And luckily for him, this was 2017, a time when social media was at his disposal. Armed with Shawnee's name and age, he got to work and tracked down a woman he thought might be her. This woman who, at the very least, had the name Shawnee, seemed to reside in Las Vegas, if her social media details were to be believed. That meant thousands of miles had stood between her and Luke. Were it not for social media, it's extremely unlikely they ever would have encountered each other. Suspecting that just maybe he'd found the right Shawnee, Luke composed a message and sent it off. He really hoped he'd manage to find his sister here, but he couldn't be sure. The wait after pressing send must have been agonizing, but a reply landed in his inbox before long. Was this it, or was Luke about to be left bitterly disappointed? He braced himself and opened up the message. He took in the words and gave it some thought. This seemed promising, but nothing could be confirmed yet. He and Shawnee sent a number of messages before they felt satisfied. But eventually, they were feeling good they'd finally found each other. The pair lived so far away from each other that nothing could initially be done. Getting from Baltimore to Las Vegas is no simple task, and a lot of money and planning needed to go into a journey like that. So, even though the siblings had finally reconnected, they still couldn't meet right away. That was soon to change, though, as the TV show The Real had caught wind of Luke and Shawnee's story. This was the perfect content for their program, so the producers invited them both to appear on it. This would be the first time they'd met in 18 years, and it was all caught on camera. In the footage, Luke is brought onto set first, where he speaks about all that has happened up until this point. He brings the audience up to speed, but clearly he is a little distracted. He keeps losing focus and surveying his surroundings, presumably attempting to see if Shawnee is anywhere to be seen. Luckily for Luke, he doesn't have too long to wait. Shawnee eventually makes her entrance, and the long-lost siblings are both reduced to tears. After 18 long years of separation, they've finally been brought back together at last. It's a happy conclusion to a difficult chapter in their lives. For her part, Shawnee explains her side of the story. She can't actually remember Luke and was only informed of his existence at 13 years of age. At that point, she started trying to track him down, and now her search is finally over. Clearly delighted by developments, she gushes on the TV show, "Right now, I'm at a loss for words. My heart's racing. I'm shaking. This is amazing."